Thank you for joining us for another Hagley History Hangout. My name is Gregory Hargreaves, Assistant Director of the Center for the History of Business, Technology, and Society at the Hagley Museum and Library in Wilmington, Delaware. Now, during these history hangouts, we like to bring you some of the great work being done by folks who have used the historical collections held in the Hagley Library, especially scholars who have received support in the form of research grants and fellowships of different kinds from the Hagley Center. One such scholar joins me today. Dominique Bregent-Heald is professor at the Memorial University of Newfoundland. Dominique, thank you for joining us today.
Thank you. I'm excited for the conversation.
Oh, terrific. You're welcome. Let's start by painting with broad strokes, so to speak. What is it you're researching and writing about?
Well, currently I'm writing a history of film at American World's Fair, starting with the 1893 Chicago World's Columbian, which was the first fair to include motion pictures, and ending with the 1964 New York World's Fair, which was the last major U.S. international exhibition. So this is a very broad time frame. And it covers both the height of the World's Fair movement in the United States, as well as the rise of cinema from a scientific curiosity to the dominant mass media of the 20th century. Um, so, when most of us think about film history in the US, we tend to think about Hollywood features and commercial theaters. But running alongside this was a fascinating world of films made for what are known as non-theatrical spaces. So, these could include museums, schools, clubs, and of course, World's Fairs. And the films were short. They were about 10 to 30 minutes long, and they were either created in-house or they were commissioned by nonprofits, corporations, industries, government entities with this kind of growing sector of industrial filmmaking. And through this kind of combination of storytelling and showmanship, they were designed to educate, to sell, to entertain, and sometimes all of that at the same time.
What an interesting topic.
Yes, thank you. It is a lot of fun.
Hmm. Well, could you perhaps take us to the beginning, the 1893 World's Fair in Chicago? What was the role of film in that? In fact, it's a little surprising that film was present at all.
Yeah, so the well-known he was kind of a celebrity of the kind of mid to late 19th century, Edward Muybridge. He developed this, it's called a zoopraxiscope that he used to record uh, animal movement as well as movement of humans and kind of like successive. He called it like instantaneous photography. So he actually erected at the Chicago World's Fair a kind of what's often called the first motion picture theater, although it wasn't quite that. And he charged an additional 25 cents admission where the fairgoers could go and he would lecture in front of these first moving images. So that's kind of like seen as like if you've ever seen images of like the the kind of galloping horse. That's Edward Muybridge. He was the first to do that in 1872. Yeah.
So then what was its role in the fair? Why was the fair a place to exhibit this work?
Yeah, well, fairs are kind of known as places to kind of laboratories in a sense of visual presentation and kind of experimentation. So you kind of start out with this first kind of like more, educational, say, use of motion pictures. And then kind of fast forward to, let's say, the 1964 World's Fair, where you've got kind of immersive multimedia presentations, again, specially built theaters, kind of really pushing the boundaries of what cinema can be and what the cinematic experience could be for fairgoers, very participatory, kind of like I said, immersive, like a very embodied experience, pushing buttons. So kind of being really, really involved with the film. And also the kind of the other um, aspect that I'm very interested in is not only kind of like the kind of film technology, that's kind of only a small part of it, film technology at World's Fairs, but how these films open a window into American cultural, social, political, and film history. So I I'm a historian, first and foremost, and I kind of think of film as an archive that captures the hopes, the anxieties, the values of the moment, and that of course the films are neutral, but they're rather very powerful tools of persuasion and ideology. So I see my role as a historian is to kind of piece together this hidden history, figuring out who made these films, how were they shown, and then how did they help shape American culture and identity through the world's stage. So in this project, I kind of have five major strands in terms of how film was used at World's Fairs. Uh, the first one is to see how they supported settler, colonial, and imperial logics. Secondly, how they worked as nation branding tools. So this is like particularly those foreign pavilions. So they would often use film to promote cultural diplomacy, trade, and probably more than anything else, promote tourism. Um, Thirdly, I look at educational and social welfare films and how they reinforced, sometimes challenged dominant ideas about race, class, gender, and ability. Um, Fourth, trying to remember, I trace the synergistic ties between the American film industry and the World's Fairs. And finally, I study how corporations used motion pictures to promote their products and processes. So again, kind of fueling mass consumer capitalism. And it was this last strand in particular, which is what brought me to the Hagley.
Well, and what put Hagley on your radar as a important place to come for this research?
Yeah, absolutely. So of course, as you know, it has vast holdings of corporate materials, audiovisual content, which of course a lot of the films, World Fair films are digitized, which is wonderful. It has World's Fair ephemera and papers of industrial designers like Raymond Loewy. Um, and so this is really where the Hagley proved invaluable to understand how film exhibition was woven into these broader strategies of advertising, branding, and kind of selling modern lifestyles. Um, since I only had 1 week, I concentrated on the DuPont's exhibits at the Texas Centennial in 1936 and the New York World's Fair in 1939, and most importantly, probably the 1964 DuPont Pavilion, spectacular pavilion, which all of these incorporated motion pictures in its kind of display.
hmm Well, what was DuPont trying to do? What was its aim by involving itself and um, putting itself on display, as it were?
Yeah, yeah. That's a great question. Um, this is kind of something that I'm just digging into, kind of the backstory of it. But as far as I understand, by the 1930s, DuPont had turned to public relations as a way to kind of soften any um, negative associations that might come with, chemical research. So this is if you've, people have heard of the Better Living Through Chemistry campaign. So this is when this emerges, and it lasts until the 1960s. And this kind of encompassed a huge kind of PR program that goes beyond motion pictures. So um, DuPont sponsored a radio program called Cavalcade of America, which was later a television version. And so their participation in World's Fairs was kind of part of that same agenda. So through films and displays, it's a way for the company to project a very carefully managed, kind of curated image of its role in modern consumer life. And really kind of emphasizing that its products would provide the American public with the best, possible standards of living. So this is different than advertising, which is kind of more like the hard sell approach that you would see in commercials. But rather it's more about um, shaping positive public perceptions of the company. And you see a lot of other corporations doing that, particularly in the 1964 World's Fair, that they would have pavilions and films that, like for example, the Johnson Wax Pavilion had a film that had absolutely nothing to do with Johnson Wax, but it was a way to kind of promote this kind of image of the company as being, I don't know, part of this really good free enterprise, American free enterprise system. And fairs are really great for this because they're, one of the few ways that provide direct person-to-person contact with potential consumers. Um, and motion pictures, so if you have a theater, you've got a pavilion, you're going to have a captive audience to convey the message. And that message would be that DuPont's role in the lives of Americans was kind of unparalleled and undisputed importance. And also kind of the um, really neat things about film is it has this unique ability to make complex subjects such as the field of chemistry, which I personally know very little about. But it will make those kind of hard science concepts more digestible to fairgoers, or it can turn, kind of dull facts and figures into something more dramatic and exciting. So that's really why you see corporations like DuPont turn to World's Fairs, turn to motion pictures, um, in this period. And if you want, I can give one kind of cool example.
Please do.
Okay, so DuPont's The Wonderful World of Chemistry presentation in 1964 is really fascinating. So it combined live performers, and then it would have sliding screen panels of 70 millimeter color film. And the actors would actually interact with the projective images, and it would be a way to like show like how cool its different fabrics were and the fashions that they were wearing and et cetera. And then it was also kind of essentially transcending the limits of the film medium by making it very interactive. And it was kind of like a musical review. It was choreographed. um, and Domenico Mortolito, I hope I'm pronouncing that right. So he's an artist that joined DuPont in 1945 as a design advisor to its advertising department. And he really was the person that kind of spearheaded this concept of the DuPont Pavilion and this circular theater. So I spent a bit of time with his papers at the Hagley, and it really revealed kind of a really interesting debate between, kind of the blue sky artist's vision and then kind of the reality of like the company's budget and what it was trying to portray. So that was probably one of my favorite things that I looked at the Hagley in April.
Hmm. Do you have a sense of how these things were received by fairgoers? Did they walk away having their minds changed in some way or thinking differently about these things some way?
Yeah, that's really hard to get at. I know, and this is, kind of an overarching issue with people who do cultural history and film history as myself, the kind of reception piece of it. Did this actually change people's minds about DuPont? Um, I know they did, because I did see after 1939 World's Fair, they did some kind of post kind of exit surveys and studies of people. And they also had kind of like focus groups and kind of psychological studies of like the mind of the consumer. But I don't really haven't had access to that kind of hard data, unfortunately. Which would be wonderful. I'm hoping to do another trip to the Hagley at some point, to do more research because there's a lot in those DuPont files. So
Hmm.
yeah, hoping that I can kind of fill in that missing piece of the puzzle at some point.
Hmm. Well, when I think about film at American World's Fairs, a really notable example that comes to mind is General Motors in 1939 and
Yeah.
how their use of visual media to sell a vision of the future of the United States as
Hmm.
automobile dependent. And um, of course, subsequently, that came to pass in a manner not that different from the story, the vision that GM was trying to sell at the World's Fair. I wonder if you could perhaps speak to that and perhaps unpack that a little bit for us.
Yeah, the I think you're referring to the Futurama. Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah, that was again a really very cool film that combined kind of uh animation and again this kind of in a way like a bizarre uh vision of the making of an automobile because if I remember correctly in the film, there are no actual people in it. It's mostly kind of like almost like stop motion animation assembling the car together as this kind of clean, almost in a way anticipating kind of a future of manufacturing without humans. So in a way, that way it was very prescient. One thing that's kind of interesting about that film and a lot of World's Fair films that are used by corporations is the emphasis on process. So how, like, there's this kind of desire to, show to fairgoers how things are made. And so this really is a way that, again, film and through kind of innovative means like animation show how, um, the kind of manufacturing process works, which, to many people might seem kind of boring, but through like the pavilion, through this kind of multimedia, you know, the kind of like I said at the outset, the big emphasis is on storytelling and showmanship. So by having all these kind of like whiz bang, uh, fancy, um, you know, uh, theaters in which the later GM World's Fair exhibits, you'd actually kind of sit in a chair and actually move through the kind of the motion picture again, very much anticipating modern theme parks, and of course Walt Disney, as you're probably aware, was his Walt Disney Enterprises did a lot of the kind of work on World's Fairs exhibits, particularly in 1964. So like the Pepsi, I know I'm kind of going off on a tangent, but this is how my brain works. The Pepsi Pavilion was kind of where the Small World first kind of was initiated, and the Carousel of Progress, which was also in Disneyland, started off at the World's Fair. So you do see kind of also like Walt Disney is again a good example of like the synergy between film industry and World's Fairs and industrial designers and corporations who were building these pavilions and incorporating film would often rely on people working in the film industry, some as well known as Walt Disney, others, lesser known craftspeople, kind of set designers, to almost make it seem like you were not only watching a movie, but you were actually kind of in the film. So again, anticipating that kind of immersive theme park experience that we're familiar with today. So it's another way that World's Fairs is a, kind of a really neat vision into the past, because, there often be, exhibits that were more historical in nation, but very much, future oriented, particularly just to circle back to 1939, which was about this vision of a world of tomorrow at the precipice of World War II. So again, that historical context is, quite important in which people were wondering what would the future hold. Excuse me.
Hmm. Well, was part of the object here to have fair goers um, associate themselves or identify with the subjects of these films?
Oh yeah, absolutely. You particularly my previous book and work was on film and tourism, and a lot of kind of travelogues in tourism films. So, for example, the ones that would be shown at World's Fair. So, like I mentioned earlier, if you had like a foreign pavilion, they would, as early as 1915, which was very surprising to me at the, was it 1915? I think the San Francisco World's Fair. Argentina, I believe, was the first foreign country to have a kind of dedicated motion picture theater in its pavilion to show films promoting tourism. And so the idea is for um, you as a fair goer to kind of, through film, imagine yourself as going to these places. And certainly a lot of another kind of good example of that isn't tourism related is the trying to remember the exact, it's like the Middleton family goes to the fair or something. It was put out by Westinghouse. And it's again kind of this film of like your, typical mid-century American, family and trying to kind of appeal to fairgoers that would also be of that same demographic, although the demographic of fairs was a lot more diverse than was, of course, what was pictured, um, on screens, which was, definitely more geared towards, your white kind of nuclear family to, particularly in the 30s through the 50s and not 50s, because there weren't many World's Fairs in the 50s. It was just really 59 in Brussels, but the 30s and then the 60s.
Well, it's a really interesting project, Dominique. Thank you so much for taking the time to share it with us today.
Thank you. I really enjoyed sharing my passion for film and World's Fairs with you.
Mhm. Well, you're very welcome. And for the audience, if you would like more Hagley History Hangouts, more information on the Center for the History of Business, Technology, and Society at the Hagley Museum and Library, you can join us online. Visit hagley.org. That's Hagley.org. Don't be a stranger.